All right, so I want to do a quick review of, first of all, personality and social psychology. And then I will send another video for abnormal psych and treatment. All right, so first of all, your personality involves your character. It's how people describe you, maybe being very outgoing, very energized. You could be shy. Again, it's the adjectives people use when they describe your character, your traits. All right, there are 4 different perspectives that explain how our personality develops. So for the test, you'll need to know, first of all, psychoanalysis. So as you recall, somebody from this perspective would state that your personality comes from maybe how you were raised as a child. Something that happened in childhood could influence your personality later in life, or it could be some unconscious thought that you have that is driving your behavior or caused your personality. Remember that a psychoanalyst is always looking at defense mechanisms, or we could be talking about the psychosexual stages of development in regards to how your personality is shaped. So Freud came up with this perspective, and he identified 3 different parts to our personality. You'll need to know those for your exam. The id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the selfish child. This is the part of your personality that you're born with, demanding immediate gratification or satisfaction. A child doesn't understand when they are an infant that they need to wait when they want something. They just cry for it. So that's the selfish part in us. We're born with this part. The superego is your conscience. So this allows us to know right from wrong. And we usually identify with the morals of our caregivers. And this is like the little angel on our shoulder arguing with that selfish devil, the id. The ego is the mediator that kind of moderates between the two. It wants to give us what we want and satisfy the id, but it also wants to do this in an appropriate manner as to satisfy the superego as well. So this is the reality principle. All right, so with this perspective, Freud said our personality stems from how our caregivers raise us, and we go through different stages during childhood, and depending on each stage, if we can transition through each stage successfully, then we will have a strong personality. If not, we may become fixated when we get older, and he referred to that as some character or personality flaw. So the first stage during infancy is the oral stage. Your pleasure centers around the mouth, being fed and sucking and chewing on things. And if our parents don't feed us in a timely manner, or we are overindulged and fed too much, that can lead to an oral fixation, which would be some personality or character flaw involving the mouth. So that could be overeating, cursing, biting your nails, etc. The toddler stage is the anal stage. This is when children are trying to become independent and potty trained. And sometimes parents can push children too young or just allow children to, become potty trained whenever and become delayed in that process. And that can lead to an anal fixation, either being extremely neat or an anal expulsion, being extremely messy and disorganized later in life. The phallic stage occurs in the preschool years, and this is when children are understanding their private parts and their genitals, and the little boys are different from little girls, and exploring that. During this stage, we have the Oedipus and the Electra crisis, and that's where the Oedipus complexes where little boys have a desire to gain the attention from their mothers and have a rivalry with the father and competition. By the end of this stage, the young boy should go back to identifying with the father. Little girls, the electric crisis comes in when the little girls have the desire to gain attention and love of their father and competition for the mother. So a flaw, if a child does not go back to identifying with the same-sex parent at the end of that, that can lead to issues of self-absorption or feeling narcissistic or having relationship issues. The latency period, this is a period during the school age years where children really don't have any sexual libido going on here. They want to interact with the same-sex peers, and the opposite sex has cuties, and this is a training ground for social interaction with your same-sex peers later in life. Then during adolescence, we go into the genital stage where we understand actually what sex is, like you and I know it today, and develop relationships with others. And of course, Freud said there's no character flaw or fixation in that stage. If we like sex, it's a good thing. Different defense mechanisms. People who are supporters of psychoanalysis believe that the mind can just automatically do things to protect us from anxiety and banish unwanted thoughts. So the first one there, reaction formation. Sometimes if we have a thought that causes us anxiety or pain, we start to say or do the opposite. So let's say a young mother who gets pregnant and has a child at a young age, she's kind of resentful. So she starts being very overprotective of the child after the child is born. So doing the opposite of what she actually thinks. The second one, repression. This would be banishing some memory that has occurred that caused you pain or anxiety. So maybe you were bullied or abused when you were young and you completely forget that entire incident. Rationalization, that would be justifying something painful that has occurred in your life. So maybe you were bullied as a child, or let's say somebody broke up with you. That's the example I gave you in class. And you're very upset about that. So you start to say things like, oh, I'm better off without them. They were no good for me. So you're rationalizing or justifying that in your mind. Repression. This is if something painful or upsetting happens to you, you start to engage in childlike behavior. You go back to an infantile state. So I gave you the example, let's say a young child who's age 7, his parents have a new baby and they're giving the new baby all of the attention and he's upset. So he starts wetting the bed again, going back to something he did in infancy. All right, we talked about 3 Neo-Freudians. The one you need to know for your test is Ung, Carl Ung, and he recognized that unconsciously we share similar ideas with others worldwide. He called this collective unconscious. So for his example was we all have the same idea of what a hero might be or a villain. All right, the second perspective would be the humanistic, and a humanist would say our personality comes from improving our self-image. If we like ourselves, we'll be more confident, we'll be more independent and more outgoing and more successful. So your 2 humanists were Maslow and Rogers. For your final exam, you'll need to know about Carl Rogers. He believed that our personality can be improved by improving self-image, and he believed in order to do that, we needed to develop what he called unconditional positive regard, and developing that requires us to be accepting of ourselves and others without criticism, being genuine in what we say. Don't be fake. Mean what you say. And also empathy, being able to put ourselves in someone else's place. That will help us completely accept ourselves, improve our self-image or self-esteem. And looking at the humanistic approach, they would say that sometimes the spotlight effect can get in the way. For example, we often feel like we're in the spotlight and everyone is judging us or looking at us. So if somebody looks at us, we're thinking, oh, why are they criticizing me? Why are they looking at me? So we shouldn't fall prey to that, because that is something that can decrease our self-image or self-esteem and interfere with that unconditional positive regard. All right. So the third perspective, when looking at personality, is called the trait perspective. And from this perspective, these individuals believe we're just simply born with our personality. And in order to find out what personality type we have, we take personality inventory tests. And the Big Five was one of those. So we just answer questions, agree or disagree. And based on our answers, they group us into categories and tell us what type of personality that we have. Allport is the one who came up with the trait perspective. Right, and the last perspective on personality is called social cognitive. And according to this perspective, our personality changes in every different experience that we encounter. For example, it's how we assess a situation and how we react to it. And our personality can change from situation to situation. And I gave you the example, if you walk into a classroom and the teacher is very uptight and irritable all the time, then you're not going to be relaxed, and therefore you may not learn, because you just can't stop focusing on that negativity, and then you become irritable. So this is referred to as reciprocal determinism. Bandura came up with that. So how you treat others will determine how others reciprocate towards you. So the way you act will determine how others react to you. So your thoughts about a situation will influence others and how they treat you. And when you assess or cognitively become aware of some situation in a social setting, your personality will change depending on your interpretation of that. All right. So that is all of the different perspectives on personality. And now we're going to move into social psychology. I'll put the next terms up for you for a second here. All right. So with social psychology, we are looking at how we interact with others, not just looking at the individual. So how we interact with others and how that affects us. All right. So we started looking at social thinking first. And one of the first concepts we looked at was the fundamental attribution error. But before I talk about that, whenever someone does something, there are two ways we can explain it. We can look at their disposition, their character, that's how they are, or we can look at the situation that they were placed in. So for example, sometimes people see someone who's homeless or out of work, and they just credit their disposition. They say, oh, they're just lazy. They don't want to work. Okay, instead of looking at maybe what's the situation that put them there. Maybe something happened in their life that caused that. Or your friend can pass you in the hallway and you wave at them and they completely blow you off. You can say, one, my friend's a jerk. That's their disposition. Or you can say, gee, something must have happened to them this morning. They did not even notice me. So that would be the situation. And a lot of people are just quick to do this, if you just simply look at something negative and say that's just how they are, that's the fundamental attribution error. So if you go out to eat and you don't get very good service, you may immediately just say, well, she's a bad waitress or he's a bad waiter. That's the fundamental attribution error. Instead of trying to put yourself in their place and figure out what is the situation that may have caused them to be inattentive. We looked at the foot in the door phenomenon, and this concept represents sometimes if we want something and we start off small and build up, we're more likely to get it. People are more likely to comply with a small request and then build up to something bigger. If you ask for something too big, you get that door in the face. The bystander effect, I'm sure you remember this well. The more people who are around, the less likely someone will stop and help in an emergency situation. So if somebody's in need or bleeding, lying on the city street, and there's a lot of people around, they probably won't get help. And it's because of a diffusion of responsibility. The more people that are around, then you think to yourself, oh, there's a lot of people around, somebody else will jump in and help, so I don't need to. So that is the bystander effect. When we looked at conformity, there are two different theories on why we conform. And a lot of times students mix these up. First of all, normative social influence. This is trying to fit in because you want to feel normal. We don't like to be seen as different. Okay, so we try to conform so that we can go along with others and we don't disappoint others. We don't like to be that outcast. Whereas informational social influence, this is when we conform because we think others have more knowledge about a topic. You may go to a car lot and the car dealer starts telling you a lot about a particular car and giving you all this information, and you think, wow, I should probably buy that because they know a lot more than I do. And sometimes that can be misleading. All right, two different researchers we looked at when we looked at conformity. First of all, Stanley Milgram. Well, let's talk about Ash first because he did his study first. So Ash wanted to show how strong the desire is to fit in and conform. So he did that study where he had a group of actors at a table, and then there was one volunteer who thought that they were actually participating in a study on perception. So he showed everyone at the table a standard line, and then he showed them three other examples, and they had to pick from A, B, C, or D which of those three lines were most similar to the standard line. And all of the actors gave the wrong guess or the wrong answer at one point during the study, and that volunteer did not want to go against the group. So about 70% of all of the volunteers or participants gave the wrong answer because they didn't want to be questioned as to why they were different. So showing how strong that desire is to conform, you'll even give the wrong answer to go along. Then Milgram was one of his students. Stanley Milgram kind of took it one step further and performed a shock the learner experiment showing blind obedience. Now this is after the Nuremberg trials, where the Nazi officers were being held accountable for war crimes, and his thought was, were all of these people bad, or were they doing bad things, just blindly following orders, this blind obedience to authority? So he set up the experiment where he had some actors. He had one actor who would be the authority figure in the lab coat, and then he had a participant who looked like they were hooked up to electric wiring that would administer shock. So the volunteer in the group, which we'll refer to as a teacher, they were told that they were participating in a study on memory. So they had to ask the man behind the panel a question, and if the man got it wrong, they had to administer electric shock. Now, of course, they're not really giving electric shock, but they don't know that. They think it's real. So with every wrong answer, they had to increase the voltage, and it went from very minimal voltage all the way up to 450 volts, which would have been lethal if it was real. Milgram believed that nobody would go that high. Nobody would do that. He was wrong. Again, about 70% of all participants. So most of the participants gave a lethal injection and went all of the way to 450 volts, would have killed the gentleman had it been real. So this shows the fact that a normal average person could actually do a very bad, destructive deed towards another human being if told so to do that from a person of authority, that blind obedience. Kind of scary. Then we looked at groupthink, which both of these, groupthink and de-individuation, are negative group influence. Groupthink, this is when common sense completely goes out the window and we do what we think is best for the group and not what we should do for ourselves or what common sense would tell us to do. So I gave you the example here of Jim Jones, and also the short story video that you watched in class, Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. De-individuation, this is when sometimes good people can engage in bad behavior because they're just getting caught up in an emotional event or the fact that they're going to remain anonymous. So this is why after like a natural disaster, you'll see grandma, coming out of a store with a shopping cart of TVs going down the street because she doesn't think that she's going to get caught. Everybody's doing it, and she thinks that she's going to remain anonymous or de-individualized. So that's de-individuation. We also looked at the difference between stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination in this unit. So a stereotype is an exaggerated belief about a group of people that can be good or bad. We said that there's a stereotype that Asians are good at math. That's an over-exaggeration, that all Asians are good at math, not necessarily a bad thing. But if this stereotype turns bad, this negative attitude then becomes a prejudice. And then if one acts on their negative attitude or their prejudice, that then is discrimination. So let's say you're an employer and you're hiring for a new position and you don't hire someone based on their gender or their race because you have a negative attitude or prejudice attitude towards that race or that gender, that then is discrimination because you've taken action. We looked at 3 possible causes. First of all, the in-group bias. That is when you are part of a group and you start to favor that group and you start to dislike people who are outside of that group, those who are different. You start to develop that negative attitude towards them and favor your own. And we looked at Jane Elliott's brown-eyed, blue-eyed experiment or exercise that she did in her 3rd grade class. All right, scapegoat. This usually involves people who are in a bad situation. Let's say you're unemployed or you're out of work And so you might start to develop a negative attitude towards immigrants who are coming in and taking jobs. Let's see, the last one there, just world phenomenon. This is kind of blaming the victim. So this is justifying a negative attitude towards someone because you believe they just deserved it. Somebody gets mugged walking down the street at 3 a.m., they deserved it because they put themselves in that place and the world is just. We don't like to think of ourselves as being, victims of a crime. So we have to say that somebody did something wrong, it's their fault, and the world is just and they get what they deserve. All right, so those are 3 different causes of reasons why we develop negative attitudes. Altruism we looked at in this unit, and altruism simply means that we do unselfish things for others. This is an unselfish act. Let's see, go put my glasses on. Okay, attraction, we looked at 5 factors of attraction, but the only thing you really need to know for your exam is, and this dates back to a previous unit when we looked at attraction, the different reasons we're physically attracted to others between males and females. Females are looking for maturity and success, somebody to take care of us, somebody that's dependable and to develop a good relationship with. Men find attraction in youth and fertility. All right, and that finishes off personality and social psych. So I hope that helps for your review.